After 4 years working abroad and sending over $100,000, I came home without warning and found my wife bald, skin and beeronies, and picking up broken dishes in the backyard. My mother said she brought this on herself. I didn't yell. I took out my phone and announced a massive compensation package that hid a trap of my own. I stood there with Paige's laptop glowing in my hands at 1:14 a.m., and for a second I forgot how to breathe right. Not shaking, not crying, just still. Like my body had decided the panic would have to take a number and wait. Final phase. Dean says her heart won't take another week, making arrangements for the transfer. I read it 4 times. Each time it meant something worse. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't wake the house. I did the thing 4 years of overnight shifts on an oil camp maintenance crew had trained into me. When something's about to go wrong, you document first and panic later. I took out my phone and photographed every line of that spreadsheet, every date, every dosage note I didn't understand yet but would. I forwarded the screenshots to my own email under a subject line that just said, receipts. Then I closed the laptop at the exact angle I'd found it open and went back downstairs to the utility room, where my wife was sleeping like she was trying not to take up space even unconscious. I didn't wake her, not that night. I sat on the concrete floor next to the cot they'd given us, an actual camping cot, in a house with 6 empty bedrooms, and I watched her breathe until the light came up gray through the little window by the water heater. Every breath sounded like it cost her something. Who is Dean? I kept thinking. I'd never heard the name in 4 years of bi-weekly phone calls home. 4 years of everything's fine, sweetheart, just miss you from my mother, and the house is coming along great from my sister, and Gwen's voice getting quieter every call until I told myself long distance does that to people. It's just the connection. It's just time zones. It wasn't the connection. I met Gwen the year before I left for the contract up north. She waited tables at a diner 2 blocks from the trade school where I was finishing my certification, and she used to slip me extra bacon when the manager wasn't looking and charge me for half of it. She had this laugh that came out before she meant it to, like it surprised her every time. When the overseas contract came through, 4 years, obscene pay for a 26-year-old with a welding certificate and no better options, she was the one who told me to take it. We build something, she said. You up there, me down here, keeping it together. 4 years is nothing if it means something after. I sent every check home, all of it, past what we needed to live on, because Gwen had an idea. Buy land, build a real house, something with our names on the deed instead of another apartment we'd never own. I trusted my mother to help her set it up while I was gone. Power of attorney, joint accounts, the whole thing, because she'd always been sharp about money, and because Gwen didn't know contractors or zoning boards or any of it, and because I was 11 time zones away and had no better option. That was my first mistake. Not the money, the trust. Looking back now, there were signs even before I ever pulled that hat off her head. Small things I'd let myself explain away over 11 time zones and a bad satellite connection. Gwen used to send me pictures constantly the first year, the foundation getting poured, the framing going up, her standing in front of drywall with paint samples taped to it like a kid with a science project. Somewhere around month 20, the pictures stopped. I told myself it was because the house was basically done. There was nothing left to photograph. Her calls got shorter too and quieter, and every time I asked if everything was okay, she'd say, fine, just tired, and I let fine, just tired be an answer instead of a warning, because believing her was easier than getting on a plane I couldn't afford to take mid-contract. My mother, when I'd ask about Gwen, always had a smooth non-answer ready. She's resting. She's been under the weather. Don't worry about us. Worry about finishing strong up there. And I ate every word of it, because it never once occurred to me that the woman who raised me could be capable of what the spreadsheet on Paige's laptop said she was capable of. By morning, I had a plan, or the beginning of one. I couldn't call the police off a spreadsheet and a bald woman in a backyard. I'd learned enough working construction sites with actual lawyers involved to know that I have a bad feeling doesn't get anyone arrested, and if I tipped my hand too early, my mother would lawyer up, empty the accounts, and disappear Gwen into some wellness facility upstate before I could blink. The house, the truck, the land, all of it was in Margaret's name. On paper, I was a guest in a life I'd paid for, so I kept smiling. I kept talking about the $400,000 buyout that didn't exist, and I watched my mother's eyes do the math out loud on her face, and I hated how easy it was to lie to her once I understood she'd been lying to me for months. At breakfast, Eggs Benedict apparently, because apparently we could afford Eggs Benedict, Margaret asked when the audit people would need to see everything. Couple weeks, I said. They want documentation. Bank statements, property records, medical records too, actually. Anything that shows the household's stable. Insurance companies get nervous about payouts to families with health issues. I watched her face for a flicker. I got one. Small, but there. Medical records, she repeated. Standard stuff, I said, buttering toast like my hands weren't cold. I'll handle it. You don't need to worry about a thing. Paige, scrolling her phone at the end of the table, didn't even look up. Can we get the truck detailed before the audit people come? It looks better clean. I almost laughed. Almost. Gwen didn't come to breakfast. She wasn't allowed to, I learned later. Margaret had decided months ago that a sick woman shouldn't be at the table making guests uncomfortable. Not that we'd had guests in weeks. Not that there was anyone left to perform for except me. I tried to get her alone that first full day home and couldn't. Every time I said I wanted to take Gwen for a drive, get some air, Margaret had a reason it wasn't a good idea. She's resting. She's got a treatment scheduled. Dean's stopping by to check on her. Every time Paige volunteered to come along, phone in hand, eyes sharp in a way that had nothing to do with sisterly concern. I told myself it was nothing. Overprotectiveness. Grief wearing a controlling face. People do strange things when someone they love is sick, I told myself, even when the someone they love clearly isn't the one they're protecting. Then I found the pill organizer. It was in the utility room, tucked behind a shelf of paint cans. A plain white weekly organizer with Gwen's name written on masking tape across the top in my mother's handwriting. Sunday through Saturday, 2 compartments each. Morning and night. I opened Tuesday morning. 6 pills, 3 of them the kind you'd recognize from any drugstore shelf, 3 of them not marked with anything at all, just white, unlabeled, slightly larger than the rest, sitting there like they belonged. I didn't touch them. I photographed the organizer, the handwriting, the date on the calendar taped beside it. Then I put it back exactly where I found it and stood in that cold little room with my chest doing something I didn't have a word for yet. Rationalize, my brain kept offering. Maybe they're vitamins. Maybe it's a compounding thing. Cancer patients get custom doses sometimes. That's a real thing. You don't know medicine. You fix diesel engines for a living. You don't know what you're looking at. Then I remembered the spreadsheet. Added the extra to her vitamins. She can barely walk to the bathroom. I did know what I was looking at. That evening, I found Gwen alone for 4 minutes while Margaret was on the phone and Paige was in the shower, and I asked her, quiet, urgent, who Dean was. Her face did something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Not fear exactly. Recognition of fear, like she'd been waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. Your mother's friend, she whispered. He comes twice a week. He used to be a nurse, I think, or he says he was. He does the IV. He says it's the treatment. Her hand went to her collarbone, to that badly healed scar. Gavin, I never saw an oncologist. Not once. Your mother said the specialist came to the house because I was too weak to travel. I believed her. God help me, I believed her for months. You're going to see a real doctor, I told her. Tomorrow. I don't care what I have to say to get you out of this house. They'll know, she said. They'll know something's wrong. Let them. I didn't sleep that second night either. I lay there running numbers instead. 4 years, over $100,000 sent home, a house I'd never signed for, a truck I'd never approved, and somewhere in the middle of all that math, a woman I loved being poisoned by degrees while I was 2,200 miles away sending money to make sure she was taken care of. The next morning, I told Margaret I needed Gwen along to sign something at the notary for the asset documentation. Believable enough, since everything financial in this family apparently required a signature I hadn't seen in years. Paige wanted to come. I told her the notary's office was tiny, 1 extra body in the waiting room and we'd lose our appointment slot, and could she please handle calling the truck detailer instead, since that was clearly the priority. Vanity beats suspicion. She stayed. I didn't take Gwen to a notary. I took her to Riverside General. Dr. Priya Nandakumar was the attending on shift that morning, a compact woman with reading glasses pushed up into dark hair, and the unhurried voice of someone who has learned that panicking in front of patients never once helped anybody. She took one look at Gwen, the scalp, the wrists, the way Gwen instinctively curled her shoulders in like she was bracing for the exam to hurt, and her expression changed in a way she tried professionally not to let us see. When was your last oncology appointment? She asked Gwen directly. Not me. I've never had one, Gwen said. Not a real one. Dr. Nandakumar looked at me. You said on intake she's been treated for cancer for 5 months. That's what I was told, I said. I need you to tell me what's actually wrong with her. She ran a full panel. Blood work, a chest x-ray, a look at the scar on Gwen's collarbone that she said, flatly, was not a biopsy site. Biopsy scars don't look like that. This looks like it was made to look like something. She photographed it for the chart. She asked Gwen gently whether anyone had ever hit her, and Gwen said no, and meant it, because what had been happening to her didn't have a bruise-shaped word yet. I want to admit her, Dr. Nandakumar said to me in the hallway, voice low. Today, her potassium's off, her weight loss is severe, and I'm seeing peripheral neuropathy, numbness in her hands and feet, that doesn't fit anything in her chart because there is no chart. Mr. Reyes, I'm required by law to file a report with Adult Protective Services when I see indicators like this. I want you to understand that before we go any further, not as a threat, as information, file it. I said. Please, file everything. Gwen refused the admission at first. Fear does strange math. She was more afraid of what Margaret would do to me, to us, to whatever was left. Please, file everything. Gwen refused the admission at first. Fear does strange math. She was more afraid of what Margaret would do to me, to us, to whatever was left to save, than she was of what was already being done to her. I sat with her in that exam room, held both her hands, which had gone thin enough that I could feel every bone, and I told her the truth, that I'd read the spreadsheet, that I knew about the final phase, that whatever came next was going to happen with or without her permission, unless we let people who actually knew how to stop it get involved. She looked at me a long time. Then she said, "Okay," in a voice so small I almost didn't hear it, and something in my chest cracked clean in half. The blood work came back late that afternoon while I was in the hospital cafeteria, pretending to eat a sandwich I couldn't taste. Dr. Nandakumar found me there. Her potassium's dangerously low, which combined with what we're seeing on the EKG puts her at real risk for cardiac arrhythmia, she said. But that's not the part that worries me most. We ran a heavy metal screen as a precaution, given the hair loss pattern. It didn't match chemo-induced alopecia, which comes in clumps over a longer timeline. Hers came out in sheets. That's more consistent with thallium exposure. We're sending a confirmatory sample to the county lab tonight, but I've seen this presentation exactly once before, in a residency rotation 15 years ago. I don't say this lightly. Someone has been poisoning your wife. I don't remember standing up. I remember the sandwich hitting the floor. How long? I said, until it would have killed her. Days, Dr. Nandakumar said. Maybe less, at the rate her cardiac markers are trending. I've already called Adult Protective Services. A caseworker will want to speak with both of you before you're discharged. And given what I'm seeing, I'd strongly recommend involving the police tonight, not after you've had time to think it over. That's how I met Carla Jimenez, APS caseworker, 12 years with the county, a woman with a soft voice and eyes that had clearly seen every version of this story before and still hadn't gone numb to any of them. She sat with Gwen for 40 minutes while I paced the hallway, and when she came out, she didn't sugarcoat anything. This is one of the more serious cases I've handled, she told me. Financial exploitation, medical neglect disguised as caregiving, and now a suspected poisoning. That combination isn't rare. Unfortunately, it's a pattern. Someone gains control of the money and the narrative at the same time, isolates the victim, and manages the story so well that outsiders don't ask questions. I'm filing tonight. But Mr. Reyes, I want to be straight with you. My report alone doesn't get anyone arrested. For that, you need the police. And ideally, before your family realizes what's happening. Poisoning cases fall apart when the suspect has time to clean the scene. I called Detective Renee Castillo from the hospital parking lot at 6:40 that evening. 19 years on the force, the last 11 in the Domestic Violence and Vulnerable Adults Unit. Dr. Nandakumar's referral, made with the kind of urgency that skips normal channels. Castillo had a voice like gravel over concrete, no wasted words. Send me everything you photographed, she said. Every screenshot, every timestamp. Do not confront your mother. Do not let your wife go back to that house tonight. And Mr. Reyes, if there's a substance actively being administered, I need to know who's giving it and where they're getting it, because that tells me whether I'm building a neglect case or a homicide case. His name's Dean, I said. I don't have a last name yet. Get me one, she said. Fast as you can and carefully. People who've already started don't stop because they got nervous. They accelerate. Before she hung up, Castillo asked me one more question, the kind that told me she'd worked more of these cases than I ever wanted to know existed. Has your wife signed anything recently? Anything she doesn't remember signing or doesn't remember the details of? I asked Gwen that night. She thought about it for a long time, and then said there'd been a stack of insurance renewal papers Margaret had brought to her bedside back in June, saying they were routine, saying Gwen was too weak to read the fine print and didn't need to. My mother would handle it like she handled everything now. Gwen had signed where the sticky tabs told her to sign. She hadn't seen the pages above the signature line. That detail alone, once I relayed it to Robert Chen the next morning, would end up being one of the pieces that made the forgery charge airtight, a signature obtained by a caregiver from an isolated, medically compromised adult who was never shown the document she was signing meets the legal definition of fraud in the inducement, Chen explained, and juries understand that instinctively even before an attorney spells it out for them. She was right, and I found out how right the next morning. I couldn't keep Gwen at the hospital past the mandatory hold without raising alarms at home, and pulling her out entirely, disappearing her, would have told Margaret everything before we had a case built. Detective Castillo actually agreed with the terrible logic of it. Gwen needed to go home one more night, wired for nothing more dramatic than her own steady nerve, while APS and the department quietly built the paperwork for a search warrant. I hated it. Gwen hated it more, and did it anyway, because by then she wanted this over as badly as I did. That night, I went back into Paige's office. I told myself it was the last time. I found what I needed faster than I expected, because Paige had never imagined anyone in this house would look. A folder titled insurance, new, and inside it, an application for a $250,000 life insurance policy on Gwen, submitted 6 weeks earlier, with a signature on the beneficiary line that was almost Gwen's handwriting. Almost, the way a forgery is almost a real thing, close enough to pass a glance and nowhere near close enough to survive a document examiner. Primary beneficiary, Margaret Reyes. Secondary, a name I finally had a last name for, Dean Ashcroft. Beneath the application, a string of text messages Paige had apparently forwarded to herself, maybe as insurance of her own kind. The way people who suspect their accessories sometimes keep receipts without admitting to themselves why. Dean, policies contestable for 2 years if it looks like anything but natural causes. Has to look natural. Slow is safer than fast. Margaret, she's not getting any stronger. Gavin's back early. We don't have 2 more months. Dean, then we move the schedule. I can increase Tuesday's dose. Heart just gives out. Happens all the time with cancer patients. Nobody looks twice. Margaret, do it Thursday. I want this finished before the audit people show up asking to see everything. Thursday, tomorrow. I photographed every message with my hands actually shaking now. No more of that eerie stillness from 2 nights before, just raw animal fear moving through me like current. I called Castillo at 11 p.m. and read her the messages word for word. That's enough for an emergency warrant, she said, and I heard her sit up straighter through the phone, heard papers moving. I'm calling the on-call judge tonight. I need you to get your wife out of that house before Dean Ashcroft arrives tomorrow, and I need you to do it without alerting your mother that anything's changed. Can you do that? I don't know, I said, honestly, because I didn't. Thursday came in gray and ordinary, which felt obscene. Margaret made oatmeal. Paige complained about the truck detailer being overbooked. Somewhere in a judge's chambers across town, Detective Castillo was getting a signature on a warrant that would let a team search the house for the substance itself, the syringes, whatever remained of the vitamins. Anything that would turn a spreadsheet and some texts into an airtight case instead of a story a good lawyer could pick apart in front of a jury. I had one job: keep Gwen inside the house, keep everyone calm, and stall Dean Ashcroft's arrival without anyone realizing that was what I was doing. At 1:15 p.m., Margaret told me Dean would be by around 3 to check on Gwen's numbers. I said that was fine, and went to find my wife, and told her, low and fast, that whatever happened in the next few hours, I needed her to trust me completely, one more time, the way she had 4 years ago, when she told me to go take that contract up north. Okay, she said again, braver this time. Steadier. I spent that morning doing the strangest performance of my life, being a good, oblivious son in a house where I now knew exactly what was hidden behind every closed door. I helped Paige carry cleaning supplies out to the truck for the detailer. I asked my mother twice, casually, whether she needed help finding the account statements, watching her get more and more absorbed in her own paperwork, more convinced the only thing at stake that day was $400,000 she believed was still coming. I kept catching myself doing the math on the clock instead of listening to what anyone was saying. 140, 152, 2 hour, each number a countdown to something I couldn't control and had to trust other people to control for me. That was its own kind of torture, the waiting. I'd spent 4 years being the one who fixed things with my hands, engines, pipes, whatever broke on a job site, and now the most important repair of my life was happening in a courthouse across town, out of my reach, and all I could do was keep my mother's attention on a lie long enough for the truth to arrive. At 2:03 p.m., I told Margaret the audit lawyer had emailed. A lawyer who, by then, was very real. A man named Robert Chen, I'd retained 2 days earlier off Castillo's recommendation, an asset recovery attorney who specialized in exactly this kind of family financial exploitation. I said Robert needed the property deed and account statement scanned and sent over immediately, today, or the buyout could fall through entirely. It worked exactly as I hoped. Margaret disappeared into her office to gather paperwork, motivated by greed in a way fear never could have moved her, and for 22 minutes she wasn't watching the driveway. At 2:31 p.m., 3 unmarked cars and a marked patrol unit came up that gold-gated driveway with no sirens, the way Castillo had promised. Quiet, so nothing could be flushed, shredded, or injected before they got inside. I remember standing in the front hallway with Gwen's hand locked in mine so tight I probably left a mark, watching my mother come out of her office holding a folder of bank statements, watching her face understand what was happening roughly 4 seconds before Detective Castillo held up a warrant and said her name. Margaret Reyes. I have a warrant to search this property in connection with the suspected poisoning of Gwen Reyes. My mother's mouth opened. What came out wasn't denial. It was, "Where's Dean?" which told the room everything it needed to know about where her mind actually was. Dean Ashcroft was picked up 40 minutes later, in his car 2 blocks from the house. A soft-sided medical cooler in the passenger seat that would turn out to contain a syringe loaded with a dose of thallium sulfate high enough, Dr. Alan Foster would later testify, to have stopped Gwen's heart within 6 to 10 hours of administration. Foster, the county's senior forensic toxicologist, 23 years running comparative analysis for the crime lab, would tell the jury that the compound matched, molecule for molecule, batch signature for batch signature. Residue found in an unmarked bottle hidden behind insulation in the garage, next to a box of old pest control supplies from a business Dean had run into the ground a decade earlier, before he lost his nursing license for an unrelated diversion charge. Old poison, repurposed. Nobody's first crime is usually their most creative one. The search of the house took most of that day and into the evening. They found the pill organizer. They found receipts for the fake IV visits, itemized like a business because Margaret had apparently been paying Dean out of my remittances and kept records the way she kept records of everything, meticulously, arrogantly, never once imagining anyone would look. They found the forged power of attorney that had let her open accounts in her name using mine and Gwen's information. They found, in a drawer in her nightstand, a folded printout of the insurance policy with a sticky note in her handwriting that read, only, don't forget, 2-year clause. Paige was arrested that same afternoon, not for the poisoning itself. Investigators never found evidence she'd administered anything, and she'd take that distinction and run with it for the rest of the process. But for evidence tampering after cell records showed she'd deleted a folder of financial documents from her laptop 40 minutes after the police arrived, apparently believing deletion meant disappearance. It did not. Cloud backups are a wonderful, terrible thing. Robert Chen filed for an emergency asset freeze within 48 hours, citing the fraud evidence, and within a month had traced $111,000 of my overseas earnings across accounts Margaret had opened in her name and moved through 3 different banks. Money for a truck, a kitchen renovation, a gift to Dean Ashcroft that turned out to be a down payment on his own condo. Chen built the civil case in parallel with the criminal one, the way he explained it, so that even if a jury somehow found reasonable doubt on the poisoning charge, the money would still come back to us through a different door. It didn't come to that. The evidence was too complete, too documented, too much a matter of my mother's own handwriting and her own text and her own spreadsheet, updated in her own hand right up until the week she nearly finished what she started. The story broke locally about 3 weeks after the arrest. A reporter named Danielle Ochoa at the Tribune had gotten hold of the court filings, which are public record the moment charges are formally filed, and ran a piece under the headline, Mother-in-Law Charged in Alleged Poisoning, Plot Tied to Forged Insurance Policy. I didn't talk to her. Gwen didn't either. But the neighbors who'd waved at Margaret over that gold gate for 2 years read every word, and by the following weekend somebody had spray-painted something ugly across the gate itself, that the new owners, whoever they'd eventually be, would have to sand off before they could ever feel at home there. Margaret Reyes was charged with attempted murder, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, insurance fraud, and forgery. She took a plea 8 months later rather than let Dean Ashcroft's testimony. He flipped fast, the way people who were only ever in it for the money tend to, paint her as the architect of the entire thing in front of a jury. 22 years, with the possibility of parole after 14. Dean got 18 for his role administering the poison, plus a permanent revocation of any medical credential he might ever have tried to resurrect. Paige pled to obstruction and financial fraud as an accessory, testified against both of them in exchange, and walked away with 3 years probation and a felony record that will follow her into every job application for the rest of her life. Last I heard, she was working retail 2 towns over, going by her middle name. I was in the courtroom the day Margaret was sentenced. She wore a county-issued jumpsuit the same gray as the sky the morning I found Gwen in the yard, and she didn't look at me once during the proceeding. Not when Detective Castillo read her summary of the investigation into the record. Not when Dr. Foster's report on the thallium match was entered as evidence. Not even when the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing was pronounced. She stood up in her cuffs and said, in the same voice she used to use to tell me dinner was ready, that she loved her family and had only ever wanted to protect what she'd built. Nobody in that courtroom believed her, least of all, I think, herself. I gave a victim impact statement I'd rewritten 11 times in a hotel room the night before, trying to find words that weren't just rage dressed up in a suit. In the end, I kept it simple. I told the judge that my mother had taught me my whole childhood that family means you show up for each other no matter what. I told her I still believed that. I just hadn't understood, until that August afternoon in the backyard, how far someone could twist those same words until they meant the exact opposite, until showing up became something you had to survive. Gwen didn't attend sentencing. She'd given her statement to Castillo months earlier, recorded and entered into evidence because sitting in a room with Margaret again wasn't a kind of strength either of us needed her to prove. She waited for me in the parking lot instead, sitting on the hood of a car that was actually, finally, ours. A used Honda Accord we'd bought with cash the week the asset freeze cleared, and when I told her the number, 22 years, she didn't cry or cheer. She just nodded slowly, like a door closing somewhere far away, and said, "Okay, now can we go home?" I used to think I'd feel triumphant when it was finally over. Mostly, I just felt tired. The specific tired that comes after you've been running on adrenaline for so long your body forgets how to stop. Gwen spent 6 weeks in treatment for the thallium exposure, chelation therapy, Dr. Nanda Kumar explained, a process almost as brutal as the poisoning itself in the short term, pulling the metal back out of her nervous system molecule by molecule, while her body fought to hold on to whatever strength it had left. There were nights I sat in a hospital chair and watched her hands shake from the treatment and had to remind myself this was the version of things getting better. It's been 14 months now. Gwen's hair came back in dark and a little curlier than it used to be, which she says is annoying, and which I privately think is the best thing I've ever seen. The numbness in her hands is mostly gone, though her left foot still goes to sleep sometimes for no reason, a small permanent signature the thallium left behind. We used the money Robert Chen recovered, plus what came out of the settlement on the fraudulent insurance policy, which the company clawed back the moment the forgery was confirmed, to buy a small place 2 states away. Nothing like the estate behind the Gold Gate. No acreage, no truck in the driveway that anyone would ever mistake for evidence of a good life. Just a house with our names on the deed, actually, our names. Actually, our signatures. On paper, Gwen read 3 times before she signed it, because she doesn't sign anything anymore without reading every word twice. I still work overseas sometimes. Shorter contracts now, 6 weeks instead of 4 years, and I call every single day. Not because I don't trust her alone, but because I never again want silence to be the thing standing between us and the truth. My mother writes me letters from the facility upstate, the same kind of facility I've thought more than once that she always threatened to disappear Gwen into. I've read exactly one. She wanted to explain. She wanted me to understand that she'd always meant to give the insurance money back to me eventually, once things settled, as if that detail redeemed anything, as if $111,000 and a syringe of thallium sulfate were negotiable line items in some family budget only she understood. I didn't write back. I don't think I ever will. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. On the nights I can't sleep and end up standing in our new kitchen at 2 in the morning, listening to Gwen breathe easy in the next room for the first time in longer than either of us wants to remember. My mother spent months building a story good enough to survive a phone call every 2 weeks from 11 time zones away. She never planned for me to come home and simply look. She lost the house. She lost the money. She lost every year of freedom she'll spend behind a door she doesn't control, in a facility that decides what she eats and when she sleeps. The exact powerlessness she spent 5 months manufacturing for a woman whose only crime was loving her son. She even lost the right to use her own name without a stranger typing it into a court database and finding out exactly what it means now. Everything she stole from us, she lost. Even that.